Sometimes, I think about the day my parents stopped seeing me as their daughter and started seeing me only as someone who could be pushed aside. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it never is with families like mine. But it left a mark all the same. My name is Lauren Davis, and I grew up in a small town just outside of Chicago. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. My childhood home was one of those cozy two-story houses with flower beds out front that my mom always kept perfectly trimmed. Inside, there were family photos on every wall, pictures of vacations, birthdays, holidays, and for years, I believed they told the whole story of us. Happy memories frozen in time. Looking back now, though, I see how incomplete those pictures really were. I have an older sister named Emily. She's 3 years ahead of me, tall and blonde, with this effortless charm that makes people gravitate toward her. Growing up, she was the golden child, not because she worked harder than anyone else, but because everything seemed to come naturally to her. Straight A's without trying, friends flocking around her, even teachers who couldn't help but smile when they called on her in class. And then there was me, quieter, more reserved, content to sit in the background while Emily shone brightly at the center of everything. At first, I didn't mind. Really, I didn't. There was something comforting about being invisible next to someone so radiant. I liked reading books alone in my room, drawing sketches no one would ever see, and taking long walks through the woods behind our house. I thought maybe someday I'd find my own way to stand out, quietly and steadily, without needing applause or attention. What I didn't realize was that invisibility has its limits, and eventually, it starts to feel less like freedom and more like erasure. The first signs came when I was 12. That year, Emily joined the volleyball team at school, and suddenly, everything revolved around her schedule. Practices, games, tournaments, it didn't matter what else was happening. If Emily had somewhere to be, the rest of us rearranged ourselves accordingly. One Saturday morning, I woke up early to show my dad a painting I'd been working on for weeks. He glanced at it briefly, nodded, and said, "Nice job, kiddo," before turning away to ask Mom if she'd packed snacks for Emily's game later that afternoon. Just like that, I faded into the background again. It wasn't just my dad. Over time, these moments added up until they became a pattern. Birthdays where Emily got extravagant gifts and I received practical ones, a new backpack instead of the art set I'd hinted at for months. Family dinners where conversations circled endlessly around Emily's achievements, while my own accomplishments went unmentioned unless prompted. Even Christmas mornings felt lopsided, with piles of presents under the tree clearly favoring her over me. And yet, I stayed silent. Partly because I didn't want to make things awkward, partly because I convinced myself it didn't matter. After all, I told myself I wasn't competing with her. I didn't need the same kind of validation she did. Or at least, that's what I tried to believe. But silence isn't neutral. It eats away at you slowly, chipping off pieces of your confidence until you start questioning whether you deserve better, or if maybe you're simply not enough. By the time I turned 16, I'd learned to keep my head down and avoid drawing attention to myself. If doing so meant swallowing disappointment or ignoring the sting of neglect, well, that was the price of peace. Then came the summer before my senior year of high school. Emily had graduated months earlier and was preparing to leave for college in California. Everyone acted like this was some monumental event, as if sending a kid off to school required months of preparation and endless discussion about dorm decor and meal plans. Meanwhile, I was gearing up for my final year of high school, which should have been exciting, but mostly felt daunting. I wanted to talk to someone about it, to share my fears and hopes for the future, but whenever I tried, the conversation inevitably shifted back to Emily. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table finishing homework while my parents planned another shopping trip for Emily's dorm supplies. They were laughing about something silly she'd said earlier, their voices warm and animated. I cleared my throat softly, hoping to catch their attention. "Hey," I said, "do you think we could look at colleges soon? I've been looking at a few options." My mom turned to me, her expression blank for a moment before softening into a polite smile. "Oh, sweetie, we'll get to that," she said dismissively. "Right now, we need to focus on getting Emily settled." That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not dramatically, There was no slamming doors or shouting matches, but subtly, like the first crack in a dam that signals water will soon break through. For the first time, I realized I couldn't rely on them to notice me anymore. So I stopped trying. Over the next few months, I withdrew further into myself. I spent hours sketching in my notebook during lunch breaks, avoiding eye contact with classmates who tried to engage me. At home, I retreated to my room after dinner, closing the door firmly behind me. When asked questions, I gave short, vague answers designed to end conversations quickly. The less I spoke, the easier it became to let go of the expectation that anyone would listen. What surprised me most was how little anyone seemed to care. My parents barely noticed my absence from family discussions. If anything, they seemed relieved by my newfound quietness. Without my occasional protests or attempts to insert myself into conversations, life flowed more smoothly for them. Emily, too, treated me with benign indifference, occasionally asking if I needed help with something but never waiting for an answer. This detachment didn't happen overnight, nor did it feel cathartic. Instead, it was slow and steady, like pulling weeds from a garden, one root at a time until nothing remains but empty soil. And though part of me mourned the loss of connection, another part felt strangely lighter. Freed, even. Because once I stopped seeking approval, I discovered I didn't need it to survive. By the time Emily left for college, our family dynamic had shifted entirely. She was gone, off chasing her dreams in sunny California, leaving behind a void that no one seemed eager to fill. My parents threw themselves into work projects and social events, filling their calendars with distractions. As for me, I continued existing in the periphery, unnoticed, but oddly content in my solitude. Still, the world doesn't stop spinning just because you step back from it. In fact, sometimes stepping back gives others permission to take up more space than they deserve. That fall, as I navigated my senior year of high school, I began to notice subtle changes in how people treated me, not just my family, but friends and teachers too. Conversations became shorter, invitations fewer. People assumed I preferred being alone, and rather than correcting them, I let the assumption stand. One particularly painful example came during midterms. I'd been struggling in calculus all semester, despite spending countless nights poring over textbooks and practice problems. When grades were posted, I saw I'd barely scraped by with a C-. Determined to improve, I approached my teacher after class to ask for extra help. She looked at me, eyebrows raised, and said, "Lauren, I didn't realize you cared so much about this class." Her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they revealed a truth I hadn't fully acknowledged. To everyone around me, I'd become invisible not just physically, but emotionally as well. No one expected much from me anymore, and as a result, they didn't bother investing energy into understanding me. Yet, even as frustration simmered beneath the surface, I refused to lash out. Instead, I doubled down on my resolve to prove them wrong, not through grand gestures or confrontations, but through quiet determination. I started waking up an hour earlier each morning to study before school. During lunch breaks, I sought out quieter corners of the library where I could focus without interruption. Slowly but surely, my grades began to improve. What struck me most during this period was how empowering silence could be. By choosing not to argue or defend myself, I denied others the satisfaction of seeing me react. Their indifference ceased to hurt because I stopped giving it power over me. Instead, I channeled that energy inward, nurturing a sense of self-worth that didn't depend on external validation. For the first time in years, I felt truly untethered from expectations, from comparisons, from the weight of trying to fit into a mold that wasn't meant for me. And though I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, I also knew I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. Winter arrived sooner than expected that year, blanketing our town in a thick layer of snow. Life carried on as usual, at least on the surface. Emily sent sporadic updates from college, mostly photos of sunsets and group outings that made her seem impossibly far away. My parents remained preoccupied with their own lives, rarely asking about mine beyond obligatory check-ins. And I continued carving out my own path, one deliberate step at a time. But beneath the calm exterior, Cracks were beginning to form. The neglect I'd endured for so long was starting to ripple outward, affecting not just me but those around me. Teachers who had underestimated me now found themselves impressed by my sudden improvement in academics. Friends who had written me off as indifferent began reaching out, curious about the change they sensed but couldn't quite explain. Even my parents, oblivious as they were, started noticing shifts in household dynamics, though they misinterpreted them entirely. One evening, during a rare family dinner, my mom brought up college applications. "Have you thought about where you want to apply?" she asked casually, as if this were a topic we discussed regularly. I hesitated, caught off guard by the question. For months, I'd assumed they wouldn't care enough to ask. Now, faced with genuine curiosity, I felt a flicker of irritation. "I've already applied to a few schools," I replied evenly, meeting her gaze. Her eyes widened slightly, and I saw the realization dawn on her face that she had missed something important, something significant about her own daughter. "Well, that's wonderful," she exclaimed, forcing enthusiasm into her voice. "Where are you thinking of going?" "Somewhere far away," I said simply, letting the implication hang in the air between us. Far away from here, I meant. Far away from the patterns and assumptions that had shaped my life for so long. The comment lingered, unspoken yet heavy, throughout the rest of the meal. Later, as I lay in bed that night, I allowed myself to imagine what it might feel like to leave everything behind, to start fresh in a place where no one knew my name or carried preconceived notions about who I was supposed to be. The thought filled me with both excitement and trepidation, but above all, it filled me with hope. Because karma, I was beginning to understand, doesn't always arrive in fiery explosions or dramatic showdowns. Sometimes, it creeps in quietly, nudging circumstances just enough to create ripples that grow larger over time. And though I couldn't yet see the full picture, I knew I was standing at the edge of something transformative. Spring arrived with a vengeance that year, melting away the remnants of winter and ushering in a season of renewal. As graduation loomed closer, I found myself reflecting more deeply on the journey I'd taken, not just academically, but emotionally. The version of me sitting in calculus class 6 months ago felt like a stranger now, someone I barely recognized. Back then, I'd been weighed down by doubt and invisibility. Now I carried myself differently, with a quiet confidence that stemmed not from external validation, but from within. Still, the process of growth wasn't linear. There were days when old insecurities resurfaced, whispering reminders of how easily I could slip back into the shadows if I let my guard down. On those days, I leaned heavily on the routines I'd built, early mornings spent studying, solitary walks through the woods, journal entries scribbled late at night when sleep eluded me. These rituals became anchors, grounding me in the person I was becoming. Meanwhile, subtle signs of change continued to emerge around me. Teachers who once overlooked me now praised my dedication openly, recommending me for honors and awards I'd never dreamed of receiving. Friends who had drifted away began reappearing, drawn by a shift they couldn't quite articulate but respected nonetheless. Even my parents, though still largely oblivious, started treating me with a newfound attentiveness that bordered on cautious curiosity. It was during one of these moments, a casual conversation with my dad about potential scholarships, that I first glimpsed the faint outline of karma taking shape. He mentioned offhandedly that he'd run into Mrs. Carter, my calculus teacher, at the grocery store. "She couldn't stop talking about how proud she is of you," he said, his tone tinged with surprise. "Said you're one of the hardest working students she's ever taught." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, not because they were shocking, but because they underscored just how low expectations had been for me all along. For years, I'd existed in a bubble of indifference, dismissed as average at best. Yet here I was, proving wrong every assumption that had ever been made about me. And while part of me wanted to gloat, to rub their faces in the evidence of my success, another part understood that true revenge lies not in confrontation, but in transformation. So I smiled politely, thanked him for sharing, and changed the subject. Inside, however, I felt a spark ignite, a quiet fire fueled by the knowledge that I was rewriting my story, one deliberate choice at a time. As April rolled into May, anticipation buzzed in the air like static electricity. Graduation rehearsals filled my calendar, along with last-minute college decisions and farewell gatherings with friends. Despite the flurry of activity, I found myself pausing often to reflect on the road ahead. Where would I go? Who would I become? The uncertainty both thrilled and terrified me, but one thing was certain: I was ready to leave the past behind. During one such moment of introspection, I received an unexpected email from the admissions office of Northwestern University. My heart raced as I opened it, scanning the lines for confirmation of what I already suspected. When I reached the final sentence, "We are pleased to offer you a full scholarship," tears sprang to my eyes. Not tears of joy exactly, though there was plenty of that too. No, these were tears of vindication, of justice served in the quietest, most profound way possible. I stared at the screen for a long time, letting the weight of the moment settle over me. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a reckoning. Every late-night study session, every ignored slight, every ounce of resilience I'd cultivated over the years had led me to this point. And while I hadn't sought revenge in the traditional sense, the satisfaction of knowing I'd surpassed every low expectation placed upon me was sweeter than any act of retaliation could ever be. When I finally showed the email to my parents, their reactions were telling. My mom gasped audibly, clutching her chest as if struck by lightning. My dad blinked rapidly, his jaw slack with disbelief. Neither said much at first, too stunned to form coherent sentences. Eventually, they offered congratulations, their voices tinged with pride, but also something else. Regret, perhaps? Or maybe the dawning realization that they had underestimated me in ways neither of them fully understood. I accepted their praise graciously, offering smiles and reassurances that everything would work out fine. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Karma, after all, has a way of compounding over time. And as I stood on the precipice of adulthood, I couldn't help but wonder what other surprises awaited, not just for me, but for those who had doubted me along the way. The weeks leading up to graduation passed in a blur of ceremonies and goodbyes. Boxes were packed, plans finalized, futures mapped out with trembling hands. Through it all, I maintained my composure, refusing to let nostalgia or fear cloud my focus. This was my moment, hard-earned and irrevocable, and I intended to savor every second of it. On the day of graduation itself, I walked across the stage with measured steps, my cap tilted slightly forward to shield my face from the bright lights overhead. Cheers erupted from the audience as I accepted my diploma, though I couldn't pick out individual voices amid the cacophony. Still, I felt their energy, the collective acknowledgement of a journey completed, a chapter closed. Afterward, during the reception held in the school gymnasium, I wandered among familiar faces, exchanging hugs and promises to stay in touch. Most conversations followed a predictable script. "Can't believe we're done. What's next for you? Stay safe, okay?" But when I approached my parents, standing together near the refreshment table, the atmosphere shifted subtly. "You've really grown up, Lauren," my mom said softly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We're so proud of you." Her words caught me off guard, not because they were unexpected, but because they carried a sincerity I hadn't heard before. For a brief moment, I considered letting them in, sharing the depth of my emotions and inviting them to celebrate alongside me. But then I remembered all the times they hadn't been there, all the moments when their pride had been conspicuously absent. So instead, I smiled politely and murmured, "Thanks." As the evening wore on, I found myself retreating to a quiet corner of the gym, watching the festivities unfold from a distance. Friends laughed and danced, families snapped photos, and somewhere in the chaos, I spotted Emily, home for the summer, chatting animatedly with a group of her old classmates. She caught my eye briefly and waved, her expression warm but distant. Watching her, I felt a pang of something bittersweet, not envy exactly, but recognition. Recognition of the paths we'd each chosen, the roles we'd played within our family, and the unspoken bond that tied us together despite everything. Maybe someday, I thought, we'd have a real conversation about it. Maybe someday I'd forgive her, not because she deserved it, but because holding on to resentment no longer served me. But not today. Today belonged to me, and to the quiet revenge I'd crafted piece by painstaking piece. Today, I stood on the threshold of a new beginning, ready to embrace whatever came next with open arms and an unshakable sense of self-worth. As the party wound down and guests began drifting away, I slipped outside into the cool night air. Stars glittered overhead, their light softened by the haze of city glow. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past 18 years lift slightly from my shoulders. Tomorrow, I would wake up and begin packing for Northwestern. Tomorrow, I would say goodbye to this town and everyone in it. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply exist. To stand beneath the vast expanse of sky and acknowledge the enormity of what I'd accomplished. Quiet revenge, I realized, isn't about making others pay for their mistakes. It's about proving to yourself that you're capable of rising above them. That no matter how invisible you may feel, your worth is undeniable. With that thought lingering in my mind, I turned and headed back inside, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road wouldn't be easy, nothing worth achieving ever is, but I knew I was prepared. Prepared to build a life on my own terms, to forge connections based on mutual respect, and to carry the lessons of my past without letting them define me. Because karma, I reminded myself as I stepped through the doorway, is patient. It works in mysterious ways, often unseen until the very last moment. And though I didn't know exactly how the story would unfold from here, I trusted that justice would continue to manifest in ways both subtle and profound. The music swelled inside the gymnasium, a lively tune punctuated by laughter and chatter. I paused for a moment, listening to the symphony of voices blending together, one final snapshot of a world I was leaving behind. Then, with a small, satisfied smile, I joined the crowd, ready to write the next chapter of my life. The weeks following graduation passed in a haze of preparation and anticipation. Boxes upon boxes were filled with clothes, books, and keepsakes, each one a tangible piece of my past life carefully packed away for storage or transport. I spent hours organizing my room, sorting through old drawings, journals, and photographs that told the story of who I'd been before this pivotal moment. Some items I kept, others I donated or discarded altogether. It wasn't just about decluttering, it was about making space for the person I wanted to become. My parents tried harder during those final days at home, sensing perhaps that our dynamic had shifted irreversibly. They asked questions about my plans more frequently now, their tone tentative but genuine. My dad even offered to help me load the car on moving day, though he stumbled over his words when suggesting it, as if unsure whether I'd welcome his assistance. I accepted politely, knowing it wasn't so much about him carrying boxes as it was about him wanting to be present in some small way. Emily called from California a few times, her voice bright and enthusiastic over the phone. She talked endlessly about her college experiences, the friends she'd made, the classes she loved, the freedom she cherished. Part of me envied her ease in navigating this transition, but another part felt detached, almost like listening to a stranger recount their adventures. We exchanged pleasantries and promises to visit each other soon, but there was an unspoken distance between us, a chasm widened by years of imbalance and neglect. On the morning of my departure, I woke early, the house still cloaked in silence. The air smelled faintly of coffee brewing downstairs, where my mom had risen earlier than usual to send me off properly. As I descended the staircase, suitcase in hand, I found her standing by the kitchen counter, staring out the window with a mug cradled between her hands. For a fleeting second, she looked smaller somehow, more fragile than I'd ever seen her. "You ready?" she asked without turning around, her voice barely above a whisper. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, setting the suitcase down beside me. She turned then, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I hope you know how proud we are of you, Lauren. Truly." Her words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity and something else. Regret? Maybe. But I didn't press her. Instead, I nodded, accepting the sentiment for what it was worth. "Thank you," I said simply. By the time we loaded up the car and pulled out of the driveway, the sun was high in the sky, casting golden light across the neighborhood streets I'd known my entire life. I glanced back once at the house shrinking in the rearview mirror, feeling neither sadness nor relief, just a quiet resolve to embrace whatever lay ahead. The drive to Northwestern University took several hours, winding through stretches of open highway flanked by fields of corn and soybeans. I drove alone, preferring the solitude to process my thoughts uninterrupted. Occasionally, I stopped at rest areas to stretch my legs or grab a quick snack, savoring the rhythm of movement and pause that marked the journey. Each mile brought me closer not only to Evanston, but also to the version of myself I'd been working toward for so long. When I finally arrived on campus, the energy was palpable. Students buzzed everywhere, hauling luggage and chatting animatedly as they reunited with friends or introduced themselves to new roommates. Dorm buildings stood tall against the late afternoon sky, their windows reflecting shards of sunlight that danced across the pavement below. I parked near the designated drop-off zone, stepped out of the car, and took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle over me. This was it, the beginning of everything I'd worked so hard to achieve. Yet instead of excitement, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not complacency exactly, but a sense of certainty that I belonged here, not because anyone else believed it, but because I did. As I unloaded my belongings and navigated the bustling crowd, I caught snippets of conversations around me. Some students complained about parking logistics, others gushed about summer internships or travel adventures. Amidst the noise, I moved with purpose, checking in at the dorm office and receiving instructions for unpacking and orientation activities. A friendly RA greeted me warmly, offering to help carry one of my heavier bags upstairs. I declined politely, insisting I could manage on my own. Something about doing this independently felt important, symbolic even. Inside my assigned dorm room, I paused in the doorway, taking in the blank canvas before me. 2 twin beds sat parallel to each other, separated by a narrow desk and dresser combination. Posters taped to the walls hinted at previous occupants' personalities, while scuff marks on the floor suggested years of foot traffic and late-night study sessions. It wasn't glamorous, but it didn't need to be. This was mine now, a fresh start, untainted by expectations or comparisons. I set to work unpacking methodically, arranging my things in a way that felt both functional and comforting. Books lined the shelves, photos adorned the corkboard above my desk, and soft blankets transformed the stiff mattress into something inviting. By the time I finished, the room already felt less impersonal, more like a sanctuary where I could retreat after long days of classes and socializing. Later that evening, as twilight settled over the campus, I ventured outside to explore. The grounds were quieter now, most students retreating indoors to rest or prepare for tomorrow's schedule. Walking along the tree-lined paths, I marveled at how different this place felt compared to my hometown. There was a vibrancy here, an undercurrent of possibility, that resonated deeply within me. Even the air seemed charged with potential, carrying whispers of dreams yet to unfold. I ended up at a small park near Lake Michigan, its surface shimmering under the moonlight. Sitting on a bench overlooking the water, I allowed myself to reflect on the enormity of this transition. Leaving behind the familiar hadn't been easy, but staying would have meant perpetuating patterns I no longer wished to endure. Here, among strangers who knew nothing of my history, I had the opportunity to redefine myself entirely, to step fully into the person I'd always wanted to be. But as peaceful as the moment felt, I couldn't shake the lingering awareness that change rarely came without challenges. Adjusting to college life wouldn't be seamless, and old habits of invisibility might resurface despite my best efforts. Still, I reminded myself of the resilience I'd cultivated over the years, the quiet strength that had carried me through countless moments of doubt and neglect. If I could survive those, surely I could navigate whatever obstacles lay ahead. As I sat there, watching the waves lap gently against the shore, I thought about karma again. Not as a force external to me, but as something woven into the fabric of my choices and actions. Every decision I made, from applying to Northwestern to choosing independence over reliance, was a thread in the tapestry of my life. And though I couldn't predict every twist and turn, I trusted that the pattern emerging would ultimately lead somewhere meaningful. Eventually, I rose from the bench and began the walk back to my dorm, my footsteps steady against the cool pavement. Tomorrow would bring new faces, new routines, and new opportunities to grow. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply exist in this liminal space, poised between the past and the future, ready to embrace whatever came next. Little did I know, however, that the seeds of karma planted long ago were beginning to sprout not just for me, but for those I'd left behind. Somewhere far away, in the quiet corners of my childhood home, subtle shifts were occurring. Conversations once centered solely on Emily now included hesitant inquiries about me. Friends and acquaintances asked my parents about their younger daughter, curious about her achievements and aspirations. Teachers mentioned my name in passing, recalling the student who had defied expectations and earned scholarships, typically reserved for top-tier candidates. And then there was Emily herself, whose golden aura seemed slightly dim these days. Her calls home grew less frequent, her updates tinged with frustration rather than triumph. Something wasn't clicking for her in California, at least, not in the way she'd envisioned. Whether it was academic pressure, social dynamics, or simply the weight of living up to everyone's lofty expectations, cracks were beginning to form in her seemingly perfect facade. Back in Evanston, oblivious to these developments, I focused on building my new life brick by brick. Classes started the following week, introducing me to professors who challenged my thinking and classmates who inspired me with their passion and drive. I joined clubs, attended workshops, and sought out mentors who encouraged me to push beyond my comfort zone. Slowly but surely, I carved out a niche for myself, one defined not by comparison or competition, but by authenticity and purpose. Yet, even amidst this whirlwind of activity, I remained acutely aware of the delicate balance holding everything together. Success, I realized, wasn't a destination but a continuous process. Maintaining momentum required effort, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to self-respect. Any misstep, any return to old patterns of invisibility or self-doubt could unravel the progress I'd made thus far. One afternoon, during a particularly grueling lecture on advanced calculus, I found myself zoning out, distracted by thoughts of home. How were my parents coping without me? Had Emily noticed the growing distance between us? These questions swirled in my mind, threatening to pull me back into the vortex of uncertainty I'd worked so hard to escape. But then I remembered something crucial. I wasn't invisible anymore. Not here, not in this world I'd chosen for myself. People saw me, not as someone's sister or daughter, but as Lauren Davis, scholar and dreamer. Their belief in me, though still fragile, was real. And it was enough to anchor me when doubt threatened to take hold. With renewed determination, I refocused on the lecture, scribbling notes furiously as equations filled the board. When class ended, I lingered behind to ask the professor a question that had been nagging at me since the previous session. He listened intently, nodding occasionally before responding with clarity and insight. As I walked away, satisfied with the exchange, I felt a surge of pride, not for solving the problem itself, but for having the courage to seek answers. That evening, as I studied in the library, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a message from an unknown number. "Hey Lauren, it's Mrs. Carter. Just wanted to check in and see how your first few weeks are going." I stared at the screen, momentarily stunned. Of all the people who might reach out, my high school calculus teacher was the last I expected. Yet here she was, extending a gesture of support that felt profoundly meaningful. After a brief hesitation, I typed out a response, thanking her for reaching out and sharing a few highlights from my college experience so far. Our conversation continued sporadically over the next few days, culminating in an invitation to join a mentorship program she coordinated for former students pursuing STEM degrees. Accepting her offer felt like closing a loop, a validation of sorts for the struggles I'd endured under her guidance. More importantly, it reinforced the idea that growth often stems from unlikely sources. Sometimes, the very people who underestimated you can become unexpected allies, provided you give them reason to believe in your potential. Meanwhile, back in my hometown, the ripple effects of my absence continued to unfold. My parents, grappling with the void I'd left behind, began reevaluating their priorities. Conversations once dominated by Emily's accomplishments now included reflections on missed opportunities with me. They spoke openly about regrets, though cautiously, as if testing the waters of accountability. For Emily, the shift proved more challenging. Her struggles in California intensified, leading to a series of poor decisions that jeopardized her academic standing. Friends distanced themselves, overwhelmed by her increasing volatility. Professors expressed concern about her performance, urging her to seek counseling or tutoring. And through it all, she clung desperately to the image of perfection she'd cultivated for so long, refusing to acknowledge the cracks forming beneath the surface. It was during one such low point that she reached out to me, her voice trembling with vulnerability I'd never heard before. "Lauren," she began hesitantly, "can we talk?" Her request caught me off guard, stirring emotions I thought I'd buried long ago. Part of me wanted to decline, to protect the boundaries I'd painstakingly established, but another part recognized the rarity of this moment. So I agreed, setting aside time later that week for a video call. When we connected, her appearance startled me. Gone was the confident, radiant sister I remembered. In her place sat someone weary and uncertain, shadows darkening the hollows beneath her eyes. She spoke haltingly at first, stumbling over apologies and explanations before finally breaking down entirely. "I don't know what I'm doing wrong," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "Everything feels like it's falling apart, and I don't know how to fix it." Listening to her, I felt a pang of sympathy, but also a flicker of vindication. Karma, I realized, wasn't confined to triumphant victories or dramatic comeuppances. Often, it manifested in quieter, more nuanced ways, like watching someone confront the consequences of their choices while you stood firmly rooted in your own path. Still, I chose compassion over judgment. "You're not alone, Emily," I said gently. "We've all got battles to fight. The key is finding the strength to face them head-on." Our conversation stretched late into the night, covering topics we'd avoided for years. For the first time, I allowed myself to share pieces of my journey, the doubts, the fears, the quiet victories that had shaped me into who I was today. In turn, she opened up about her insecurities, revealing vulnerabilities I'd never suspected existed beneath her polished exterior. Though the call ended without resolution, it marked a turning point in our relationship. No longer bound by the roles we'd played growing up, we began forging a connection based on mutual understanding and respect. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it represented progress nonetheless. In the weeks that followed, I returned to my routine at Northwestern, buoyed by a renewed sense of purpose. Classes became more engaging, friendships deepened, and opportunities abounded. Yet amidst the flurry of activity, I remained mindful of the lessons learned along the way. Quiet revenge, I reminded myself, wasn't about winning or losing, it was about proving to yourself that you're capable of rising above adversity, no matter how insurmountable it may seem. And yet, even as I embraced this philosophy, I couldn't ignore the lingering tension between my family and me. While strides had been made, unresolved issues still lingered beneath the surface, waiting to be addressed. Whether through confrontation or reconciliation, I knew closure wouldn't come easily or quickly. So I pressed forward, trusting that time and patience would reveal the answers I sought. Until then, I focused on nurturing the life I'd built for myself, one grounded in dignity, resilience, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your worth isn't determined by anyone else's opinion. Because karma, I reminded myself as I walked across campus one crisp autumn morning, is patient. Its wheels turn slowly but inexorably, shaping destinies in ways both subtle and profound. And though I couldn't predict exactly how the story would unfold from here, I trusted that justice would continue to manifest in ways that honored not just my journey, but the journeys of those around me. The wind picked up as I adjusted the scarf around my neck, pulling it tighter against the chill. Leaves crunched beneath my boots as I made my way toward the student center, where a career fair awaited. Opportunities stretched out before me like an open road, inviting exploration and discovery. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to meet them, not with fear or hesitation, but with the quiet strength that had carried me this far. And so I stepped forward, leaving behind the echoes of the past while embracing the promise of the future. Winter arrived in Evanston with a vengeance that year, blanketing the campus in thick layers of snow and turning the lake into a shimmering expanse of ice. The air carried a biting chill, but inside my dorm room, I felt warmer than ever, not from radiators or blankets, but from the quiet satisfaction of knowing I was exactly where I belonged. My first semester at Northwestern had been nothing short of transformative. Classes challenged me daily, friendships blossomed organically, and opportunities unfolded like pages in a book waiting to be written. Yet, despite this newfound sense of belonging, there were moments when the weight of unresolved tensions tugged at the edges of my mind. Emily's tearful confession during our video call lingered in my memory, as did the subtle shifts in tone whenever my parents mentioned my name. They weren't dramatic changes, nothing earth-shattering, but they hinted at something deeper brewing beneath the surface. Karma, I reminded myself, works in mysterious ways, often revealing itself only when you least expect it. It was during one such moment of introspection, a quiet evening spent journaling by lamplight, that my phone buzzed on the desk beside me. Glancing down, I saw an unfamiliar number flash across the screen. Curiosity got the better of me, and I answered cautiously. "Hello." "Lauren, it's Mom," came her voice, hesitant yet urgent. "We need to talk." Her words sent a jolt through me. Conversations with my mom usually followed predictable patterns, updates about mundane details, polite inquiries about schoolwork, perhaps a casual mention of Emily's latest escapades. This tone, however, was different, strained, almost desperate. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting up straighter. There was a pause before she spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. "It's Emily. She dropped out of college." The news hit me like a punch to the gut, though not entirely unexpectedly. Over the past few months, her struggles had become increasingly apparent, even from afar. Still, hearing it confirmed aloud brought a mix of emotions bubbling to the surface: shock, sadness, vindication. But above all, clarity. "She came home last week," Mom continued, her voice cracking under the weight of unspoken regret. "She won't say much about what happened, but, well, it's bad, Lauren. Really bad." I listened silently as she recounted snippets of Emily's return, the late-night arguments, the withdrawn silences, the hollow look in her eyes that mirrored the fragility I'd glimpsed during our call weeks earlier. It wasn't just academic failure, it was something more profound, a collapse of identity and purpose that left her floundering in its wake. "We don't know how to help her," Mom admitted finally, her voice breaking. "She won't listen to us. But maybe she'll listen to you." For a long moment, I said nothing, letting the gravity of her request sink in. Helping Emily meant revisiting old wounds, confronting dynamics I'd worked so hard to distance myself from. Yet, as painful as it might be, ignoring her struggle felt equally untenable. So I took a deep breath and gave the only answer I could. "I'll try," I said softly. "But I can't promise anything." The drive back home for winter break felt surreal, like stepping into a dream half-remembered. Familiar landmarks blurred past my car window, each one triggering memories both painful and poignant. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the sight of my childhood home stirred conflicting emotions, nostalgia mingled with unease. For better or worse, this place still held pieces of me I couldn't fully escape. Inside, the atmosphere was subdued, heavy with unspoken tension. My parents greeted me warmly, but awkwardly, their smiles tinged with apprehension. Emily, on the other hand, avoided eye contact altogether, retreating upstairs the moment I walked through the door. Dinner that night was a strained affair, conversation faltering repeatedly as we tiptoed around the elephant in the room. Later that evening, I knocked gently on Emily's bedroom door, bracing myself for whatever awaited me on the other side. She opened it slowly, her expression guarded but resigned. Without a word, she stepped aside to let me in. Her room was a stark contrast to mine, cluttered and chaotic, clothes strewn across the floor, textbooks gathering dust on the shelves. She sat cross-legged on her bed, hugging a pillow tightly against her chest. I settled onto the chair by her desk, studying her face for signs of the sister I used to know. What I saw instead was someone lost, broken, and achingly human. "You wanted to see me," I began carefully, breaking the silence. "So here I am." She nodded, swallowing hard before speaking. "I messed up, Lauren. Big time." Her voice wavered, raw with emotion. "And now everyone looks at me like I'm some kind of failure." "They don't think you're a failure," I replied, though even I wasn't sure if that was true. "They're worried about you." "We all are." "But you're not," she countered sharply, her gaze snapping up to meet mine. "You never cared enough to worry." Her accusation stung, cutting straight to the heart of truths I'd buried long ago. Part of me wanted to defend myself, to explain how years of neglect had hardened me against caring too deeply about anyone who didn't reciprocate. Instead, I chose honesty. "No, I didn't," I admitted quietly. "Because worrying doesn't fix anything. Action does." She stared at me, startled by the bluntness of my response. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of unspoken grievances hanging thick between us. Then, slowly, she lowered the pillow and leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "What do I do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How do I fix this?" I hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't sound hollow or patronizing. Finally, I settled on simplicity. "You start small. One step at a time. Maybe go back to therapy, or take some community college classes to get your footing again. Whatever it takes to remind yourself that you're capable of more than this." "And if I can't," she pressed, tears pooling in her eyes. "If I screw it up again? Then you keep trying," I said firmly. Because giving up is the only real failure. Something shifted in her expression then, a flicker of resolve, fragile but present. Whether it would endure remained to be seen, but for now it was enough. Enough to spark hope, however faint, in a situation that had once seemed hopeless. As the days passed, I found myself slipping into a role I hadn't anticipated: mediator. Conversations between Emily and our parents grew less combative, thanks in part to my insistence on open communication and mutual accountability. Old grievances surfaced, painful but necessary to address, paving the way for tentative reconciliation. Yet, even as progress unfolded, I couldn't ignore the broader implications of these developments. Karma, after all, isn't confined to individuals, it ripples outward, affecting entire ecosystems of relationships. Watching my family grapple with the consequences of their actions and inactions was both humbling and empowering. It reinforced the idea that justice isn't always loud or immediate. Sometimes it unfolds quietly over years, reshaping lives in ways no one could have predicted. By the time I returned to Northwestern after the holidays, I carried with me a renewed understanding of forgiveness, not as absolution, but as acceptance. Acceptance of imperfections, of mistakes made and lessons learned. Acceptance of the fact that growth is messy, nonlinear, and often painful, but ultimately worthwhile. Back on campus, life resumed its rhythm, familiar yet changed. Friends noticed a shift in me, commenting on the steadiness in my demeanor, the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from within. I didn't explain it to them, not fully, but they sensed it nonetheless, a transformation born not of revenge, but of resilience. And so, as I stood on the edge of Lake Michigan one crisp February morning, watching the sun rise over the horizon, I allowed myself to reflect on the journey thus far. Quiet revenge, I realized, wasn't about making others pay for their wrongs. It was about proving to yourself and to the world that you're stronger than any injustice thrown your way. That dignity, patience, and self-respect aren't just virtues. They're weapons wielded with grace and precision. Karma, I thought as the first rays of sunlight kissed my face, is patient. Its wheels turn slowly but inexorably, shaping destinies in ways both subtle and profound. And while I couldn't predict every twist and turn ahead, I trusted that justice would continue to manifest in ways that honored not just my story, but the stories of those intertwined with mine. With that thought lingering in my mind, I turned and walked back toward campus, ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. Because in the end, revenge isn't about destruction, it's about creation. creating a life defined not by the past, but by the infinite possibilities of the future. And I intended to make mine count.